When the Edmund Fitzgerald went down, search crews swept the lake for days and never recovered a single body. People found that eerie. In most waters, victims eventually rise after a few days. But Lake Superior plays by different rules. The wreck site was later treated as a protected underwater grave site with million-dollar fines for intruders. Why such strict protection? What did officials understand that the public did not? The explanation traces back to what divers encountered in 1994. Near freezing water that preserved remains in ways no one expected. Back in June 1958, when the Edmund Fitzgerald first touched the water, it drew crowds. At 729 ft long, it was the largest ship ever to sail the Great Lakes, only 1 ft shy of the St. Lawrence Seaway's maximum. For 17 straight years, it hauled taconite iron ore pellets from Minnesota to industrial hubs like Detroit and Toledo. They nicknamed her the Mighty Fitz because she wasn't only huge, she was swift and dependable. Captain Ernest McSorley, with over 40 years on the Great Lakes, was the steady hand at the helm. By 1975, he was 63 and planning to retire at season's end. Before hanging up his cap, he agreed to make one last run. On November 9, 1975, the Fitzgerald departed Superior, Wisconsin, loaded with more than 26,000 tons of taconite pellets, bound for a steel mill near Detroit. She was not alone. The SS Arthur M. Anderson sailed the same route. Together, they pushed across Lake Superior. The calm broke quickly. By November 10th, a brutal system had spun up, one of the infamous Witches of November. This one was ferocious. Winds neared hurricane force with gusts clocked at 86 mph. Waves built to 35 fast massive freighters were tossed like bath toys. As daylight faded, the Fitzgerald was in real trouble. Captain McSorley called the Anderson in a level voice that belied the message. The ship had a bad list, meaning she was leaning, both radars were out, and green water was pounding the deck. He added it was among the worst seas he had ever seen. Blind without radar and likely taking on water, McSorley and the Anderson's skipper tried to angle both ships toward Whitefish Bay, Michigan, the nearest refuge, but time was slipping away. At about 7:10 p.m. on November 10th, the Anderson radioed for a status check. McSorley replied evenly, "We're holding our own." Those were his last words. Minutes later, the Anderson scope showed the unthinkable. The Edmund Fitzgerald had vanished. No one witnessed the sinking. No mayday went out. One moment she was there, the next gone. In a matter of minutes, a 729 ft giant and all 29 men aboard disappeared into Lake Superior's dark. Not a single body was ever recovered. When searchers later located the wreck, it lay in 2 pieces on the bottom. To this day, no one can say with certainty why she went under so fast. The lake seemed to swallow her whole. When the Fitzgerald fell silent, the Arthur M. Anderson's crew knew something was terribly wrong. Though the storm still raged, they swung around and charged back into the fury. They would not wait. The U.S. Coast Guard launched a major search that night, calling in any ship that could assist, even as violence in the weather kept many at bay. Aircraft skimmed the wavetops and vessels crisscrossed the last position in eastern Lake Superior. As hours ticked by, the only finds were fragments, shattered lifeboats, torn rafts, scattered life jackets. No bodies. Not one of the 29 came home. The lifeboats told a stark tale. They weren't lowered. They were torn away and smashed. The crew never had time to abandon ship. It was too fast, too ruthless, too final. Days later, on November 14, 1975, a Navy P-3 Orion passed over Lake Superior and picked up a strong magnetic target. The spot lay about 17 km northwest of Whitefish Bay, near the Canadian border. Sonar runs confirmed it. The Fitzgerald sat 530 ft down. The bow rested upright. The stern lay inverted. Between them stretched a trail of twisted steel, cargo, and debris. It looked as if the hull had split as it slammed into the lake bed, more violent than anyone had imagined. People wanted answers. How could such a big freighter vanish without a distress call? The U.S. Coast Guard opened a formal inquiry. Their conclusion, the cargo hatch covers may have failed in the storm, letting heavy water pour into the holds and rob the ship of buoyancy. Some experts thought the flooding sent her bow first to the bottom, which would fit a 2-piece wreck. Others disagreed. The National Transportation Safety Board suggested the ship might have struck a shoal or even broken apart on the surface. Many believed a chain of failures converged that night. No definitive cause emerged. What is clear, it happened fast. Whether she fractured on the surface or upon impact, the end came so suddenly the men had no time to escape. About an hour before she disappeared, Captain Ernest McSorley radioed a nearby vessel. "I have a bad list, one of the worst seas I've ever been in." That was it. Towering waves and hurricane-force winds did the rest. No one got to the boats. No bodies surfaced. Everything and everyone went down together. The disaster reshaped policy. After 1975, inspections grew stricter, especially around hatch integrity. Vessels were required to carry better depth finders and cold water survival suits. If the Fitzgerald's crew had those suits, a few might have stood a small chance. But none of the 29 had them then. The water hovered at 36 F. In such cold, numbness comes in minutes. After days of searching, the Coast Guard ended recovery operations. The wreck lay more than 500 FT down, beyond practical reach at the time. Families were told their loved ones would remain in Lake Superior's cold, dark keeping. The story did not fade. It lived on in the hearts of those who knew the ship, especially the families of the 29. Though the wreck rested over 500 FT deep, people felt drawn to it. Some sought causes. Others sought quiet. What they encountered wasn't easy to discuss. In May 1976, only 6 months later, the U.S. Navy sent Curve 3, a tethered robot, to photograph the site. It found the Edmund Fitzgerald in two vast sections, the bow upright, the stern upside down with heavy steel and broken hull strewn between. The video was murky and the light scarce. The mission focused on mapping, not remains. No crew were seen, and the questions lingered. In 1980, a milestone. Jean-Michel Cousteau, son of famed explorer Jacques Cousteau, descended in a small submersible, the first human visit to the wreck. Launching from Calypso, the team stayed outside the hull, studying bends and tiers that suggested top-down failure, perhaps a surface break. But nothing proved it. Again, no bodies were sighted. Some suspected the men were trapped within the hull, concealed by steel or sediment. Others thought Superior's power had moved them. No firm answers. Only hope that one day, clarity might come. The 1989 survey was different. A coalition including NOAA, National Geographic, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers towed advanced imaging gear and piloted an ROV, capturing unprecedented 3D detail. Hours of video were logged for research and museums. Still, publicly, nothing about the men. The ship's condition took center stage. The fate of the crew remained a closed chapter. Then came 1994, 19 years after the Edmund Fitzgerald disappeared. 2 expeditions headed down that summer. One, led by Dr. Joseph McInnes, used a submersible for 6 dives, gathering hours of crisp footage, notes, and measurements. Despite the data, the root cause remained elusive. The other team, Deep Quest Linity, led by Fred Shannon, made 7 dives totaling over 42 hours. During a quiet pass near the bow, they saw what would haunt them: the preserved remains of a crewman lying face down in the cold lake bed. Nearly 20 years under near-freezing water had slowed decay. The figure wore coveralls and what looked like a life jacket. The fabric was failing, but you could still see the cork flotation blocks. He had tried to survive. He'd put on a vest in those frantic final moments. It wasn't enough. He went down with his ship. Footage from that dive appeared in a 1995 documentary. The image was brief, but it changed everything. Families were devastated. No one expected to see their loved ones' remains on television. It felt like a violation of a sacred space. By then, it was clear many of the 29 were still with the wreck. The near-freezing water explained why bodies never reached shore, and why recovery had never happened. The depth was punishing. The site had become personal. These were not just names. They were still there. In 1995, the families made a profound decision. Nothing more would be taken from the wreck, except one thing: the bell. The bell had once kept time for the Fitzgerald's crew. Now it would stand for their memory. A replica, engraved with all 29 names, would be lowered in its place so the site would retain a marker, and families would have a memorial on land. On July 4, 1995, the operation unfolded, led by the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society, Canadian authorities, and the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians. Using the hard suit known as the Newt suit, divers unbolted the 200 lb bronze bell from the pilot house at exactly 1:25 in the afternoon and brought it to the surface. Families watched from a nearby vessel. Many wept as it broke the water. For some, it was the only part of their loved one they would ever see. Today, the bell is the centerpiece at the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum at Whitefish Point, Michigan. Below, the replica bell remains with the wreck, bearing the 29 names. It's more than a marker. It's a gravestone, and it has never been moved. That same year, two men did the unthinkable. Terrence Teisel and Mike Z became the only people to reach the site on scuba. They dropped 530 FT, no sub, no tether. It was a record-setting, extremely hazardous dive. They had about 6 minutes on the bottom before a painstaking ascent and over 3 hours of decompression. Even then, they attempted no recovery. The message was clear. This was a grave site. The bell was taken to remember. Everything else would remain. People still ask why the bodies were never brought back. The wreck's location is no mystery, 2 pieces on the bottom at about 530 paroth, but the reasons are practical, natural, and deeply human. First, the sinking itself. It was fast. Some believe she plunged nearly straight down, perhaps breaking up before the bottom. Anyone aboard either went with the hull or hit water so cold it stops breathing in seconds. At that depth, no one swims up. Lake Superior is unique. It's bitterly cold all year, around 36 degrees F, and in November, near freezing. In warmer water, decomposition gases can lift remains. In Superior, the cold slows that process so much that the lake never gives up her dead. Following the Fitzgerald's loss, no bodies surfaced, ever. In 1975, the technology to recover at those depths in those conditions simply didn't exist. Think of it as a 53-story building underwater. Ordinary divers cannot go there. You need specialized gases, advanced suits, or submersibles, and even then the Great Lakes surface conditions can make operations perilous. In 1995, 2 decades on, a highly trained team could manage only minutes on site. Attempting body recovery would have risked more lives for a mission likely to fail. By the time cameras documented a body in 1994, the cold had slowed decay but not stopped it. Remains were largely skeletal, held together by clothing. Inside the hull, conditions would be similar, or worse. Some may lie under wreckage or settled into the sediment. Raising them after so many years would not feel like rescue. It would feel like disturbing a grave. Even gentle handling could cause remains to disintegrate. There may have been a narrow window in late 1975 to probe for air pockets or locate rafts, but the tools weren't available. By the time we could see clearly, the men had become part of the deep. Most important of all were the family's wishes. Over time, the Fitzgeralds stopped being only a wreck. It became a tomb. Husbands, fathers, sons went down together, and the knowledge that they remained together brought comfort. Families did not want fragmentary remains pulled from the lake after so long. When proposals surfaced to recover bodies with modern tech, the answer was no. Let them rest with their shipmates where they met their end. That wish was honored. The bell came up in 1995, and a new bell bearing all 29 names went down. Everything else stayed. In response to the 1994 footage, protections grew stronger. In 1997, Michigan made it a crime to publish or display images of human remains from shipwrecks without family permission. Public outrage and the family's pain drove the change. In 2006, Ontario, where the wreck lies, declared the site a protected underwater grave site. Unauthorized diving became illegal, with fines up to $1 million. The point wasn't only the Fitzgerald, it was a wider commitment to honor the dead wherever they rest underwater. In the end, the absence of recovered bodies isn't just about 500 feet of water, 36 degree F temperatures, or money. It's about peace. It's about allowing the 29 to remain where they fell, undisturbed, held by the same cold that claimed them. The lake that never gives up her dead became their final resting place. For the families, that is enough.